Might makes right. That has been the mantra for mankind since the birth of our species. If you look through history, you will see the rise and fall of empires. In those times, conquerors were revered and looked to as heroes. Think of it Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar of Rome. However, as time rolled on, the conquering and exploitation of a people became unacceptable in the public eye. Leaders of powerful countries weren't about to allow this public sensitivity stand in the way of their desire for national power. They needed to think of a way to rationalize the hostile takeover of another people. That brings us to the main topic of discussion. Colonization is defined as an ongoing process of control by which a central system of power dominates the surrounding land and its components. Mexico and India felt the effects of colonization in their respective struggles for independence. I found that the most devastating characteristic of colonization was compound oppression. What is compound oppression? It is a term that I coined during my studies at Southern Methodist University. Compound oppression is when a colonizing power uses the native people as a resource that contributes to the native people's own oppression. This first photograph we see is appropriately named Indian Soldiers, taken by Lala Deen Dayal between 1870 and 1889. This depicts members of a Sikh regiment. They were known to be some of the most hardened fighters in the Indian Army. While their uniforms look Indian, there is no doubt that during this time period, they took their orders from the British. The British used the Indian Army as the iron fist of their military. The Indians had no interest in being used in such a way, but were reluctantly obedient to the British. The British called on the Indian Army to supply 700,000 troops in World War I. Then, after the war, they were used throughout the subcontinent as a peacekeeping force for the British Empire. The British are obviously using the Indian people to fight for causes that are not necessarily their own. However, that exploitation is not what I want to focus on. I think the interesting role that the Indian Army plays is the role of peacekeeper. A great example is Gandhi's Salt March. The Indians wanted to protest the high tax they had to pay on salt.
No, sir. The gate is closed.
As you can see, the soldiers that are beating the Indians are Indians themselves. The British would use the Indian Army to help quell Indian rebellions. This is a perfect example of compound oppression. The British don't have to rely on their own manpower to quell the rebellions of the Indian people. They could rely on the power of the Indians to oppress their own people. This is the most devastating part of compound oppression. The British had successfully turned the Indians against their own people. Here we see an image of a railroad being built in 1890. There are two important things to consider when analyzing this image. Who does this railroad benefit? And who do we see constructing this railroad? The answer to the first question is Britain. Railways helped the British establish supply chains of cheap food and other commodities. Furthermore, they helped the British boost the value of Indian exports by providing faster and cheaper transportation. Now take a look at the workers. They are all Indian. This is another example of the British relying on Indian labor to increase British power. Look closer at the photograph. There are three figures dressed in white. These men look like they're in charge of overseeing the construction. These men are all Indian. It is a testament to the powerful nature of compound oppression. Not only can the British use Indian manpower for their own benefits, but they can even rely on Indian supervision. Once again, the British can sit back and watch as the Indians work together to strengthen the British Empire's grip on India. Mexicans also felt the hardships of compound oppression. Mexicans began to be exploited for their labor after the United States turned the Mexican North into the American Southwest in 1848. Mexicans who had been accustomed to working in these regions were now considered immigrants. They were paid less and even restricted from working if white men were also looking for jobs. This is an image that shows Mexican miners protesting with American company employees trying to calm the strikers. The Americans used compound oppression by eliminating the time that Mexicans could work. The United States passed the 1917 Immigration Act, which made it very difficult for Mexican immigrants to go to the United States and find work. However, the United States would repeal the act in times of need, like World War I. Whenever the United States needed cheap labor, they could rely on the Mexicans, only to sweep them away when the work was done. The Mexican laborers would only be allowed to work when it suited the Americans. That is to say, the Mexicans could only work to benefit the United States. The only benefit for the worker was the low wage. This form of compound oppression only allows the oppressed to work to serve the colonizer. If the colonizer did not need cheap labor at the time, Mexicans were out of luck. The Mexicans were treated as an emergency workforce that could be exploited whenever the United States saw fit. However, Mexicans were used to being oppressed. Oppression was a strong institution in Mexico before the Americans arrived. The casta system was a hierarchical system of race created by Spanish elites in the 17th and 18th centuries. The system functioned where the lighter-skinned peninsulars were thought of as superior to the other people with darker skin. This is because the peninsulars were able to claim that they had more pure Spanish blood. The darker-skinned members of the casta were forced to work for the richer, lighter-skinned members. The peninsulars were able to take advantage of the others by paying them ridiculously low wages, while the laborers worked for the peninsulars' benefit. The casta system is a perfect microcosm for colonialism. It shows how the rich get richer by oppressing the poor. I think these two images, taken in Mexico during the early 1900s, show how lasting the effects of this system were. Here we see darker-skinned individuals at the market. Look at the way they are dressed. Their clothes are rags, and they look very poor. Now look at this portrait of a lighter-skinned Mexican woman in contrast. It is easy to see the effects of the casta system hundreds of years later. When a colonizer takes over a new region, they will do all that is in their power to exploit the natives. It becomes doubly harmful when the oppressed natives are forced to work towards their own oppression. Compound oppression is the reason colonizers are so hard to break away from. It teaches the natives a system that is designed to take away power from the natives, while simultaneously giving the colonizers more power.